Hi, everyone. I'm Eric Goldschmidt, the Properties of Glass Program Supervisor at the Corning Museum of Glass. And for this first episode of Connected by Glass, what better topic to discuss than the technology that enables us to be on a video chat like this in the first place, fiber optics. Did you know that every call you make, every video conference you participate in, and every show you binge watch is possible because of the network of glass underneath it all? Fiber optic technology is the backbone to our communications networks all around the world these days. Video, audio, and data information is sent in the form of codes of laser light signals through tiny threads of precisely engineered glass known as optical fibers. Sending information in the form of these light codes has greatly increased the amount of information we can move and the speed at which it can be shared. We're all experiencing the result of this amazing technology right now. While the idea to communicate with light signals had been discussed for many years, it wasn't made possible until 1970 when scientists from Corning Glass Works, now known as Corning Incorporated, invented the ideal combination of glasses. That makes this year, 2020, the 50th anniversary of the development of the right glasses for this crucial technology. And wow, how we're all relying on it so much right now. We've brought together a group of experts to discuss this topic and answer questions you may have about it. Joining me for our conversation, we have Dr. Claudio Mazzali, Senior Vice President of Technology for Corning Incorporated, Chris Schmidt, Executive Producer of the NOVA program on PBS, and Dr. Marvin Bolt, Curator of Science and Technology at the Corning Museum of Glass. We're going to spend about 30 minutes introducing you to this amazing technology, but please ask us questions or share some comments, and we'll address them in our question and answer portion. So to get things going here, Marv, I'd like to ask you a question. Now, sometimes we hear the term optical fiber, other times we hear the term fiber optics. Could you tell us what the difference is?
In casual conversation, the two phrases are pretty much interchangeable. But if we want to be a bit more precise, optical fiber means the actual physical strings of glass. Fiber optics, on the other hand, means how we make or use that glass, such as for communication. So optical fiber is the glass itself, fiber optics is how we use it.
And what exactly is an optical fiber?
Optical fiber is a string of glass that carries light signals encoded with information. It's very thin, about the size of a single strand of human hair. And inside that glass string are two kinds of highly specialized glass. At the center is a core glass that's surrounded by the second glass, called a cladding glass. The combination is encased in protective layers. Those are often made of plastic with some reinforcing materials. As we move from the center of the fiber outwards, we have a core glass, cladding glass, and then protective layers.
What does one do with optical fiber?
So what do we do with optical fiber? We can think of optical fiber as a replacement for the copper cable that can carry phone calls, internet, or TV signals to our home. Instead of sending an electrical signal through copper cable, we send a light signal through optical fiber. And as that light signal passes through that core glass, it keeps reflecting off the cladding glass. It acts like a mirror. The signal is trapped inside the core glass and travels from one end of the fiber to the other, moving at the speed of light. Because that phone call, internet data, or TV signal travels through optical fiber so quickly, it seems instantaneous to us.
Now, Chris, I wonder if you could address, why do optical fibers need to be glass? So why couldn't they just be another material?
Well, I tried making an optical fiber out of a piece of charcoal, but I noticed that the light didn't get through it very well. So, I mean, we all know that glass allows light to pass freely. I mean, that's why our windows are made out of glass. Other materials do too, clearly clear plastic bottles and things like that. But the trick, so I'm not a physicist, but I do get to play one behind the camera on TV at Nova. But so I can tell you a little bit about what I've learned. So, you know, as light travels through any kind of a medium, it's both a particle, a photon, and a wave. And as light moves through something that's transparent like glass, it's not that the thing that's transparent is empty. It's that as the light moves through the material, in this case silicon and oxygen bound together in a matrix, the light waves are hitting atoms. They're exciting electrons. The electrons are re-emitting the photons, and they just kind of keep charging down the length of the fiber without losing too much energy. In something like plastic, even clear plastic, it's a much more complex substance. It's got a lot more chemistry to it, and you have atoms predominantly like carbon in there that don't do as good of a job of re-emitting the photons in a way that doesn't cause you to lose energy. So basically, you just want something that will let light travel as far as possible without diminishing in its intensity.
All right, and Claudio, maybe you could tell us what it is that makes the glass that Corning Incorporated developed perfect for optical fiber, and how does it really enable the technology?
Well, for the fiber to work, as Marvin and Chris just explained, right, we need to play with optics, with material properties, in process conditions to make that glass in the core extremely transparent, while the glass in the cladding, as Marv said, ensures the light is basically trapped in the core. You need that to ensure the optical signal goes as far as possible. However, you need to make this concept to work in practical applications as well. So you need to ensure the glass is, and other layers around the glass as well, right, are designed to be very mechanically robust. They need to be environmentally stable. They need to be very flexible to, you know, allow deployments around corners, inside buildings, inside houses. They need to be easy for operators in the field to install, to connect fiber to fiber. And of course, they need to have properties that can enable manufacturing in a very large scale and consequently at a low enough cost to really enable all this connectivity that we are seeing these days, right? In all those factors, by the way, they may be different for different applications. That's an interesting thing. There are many different types of fibers. During these 50 years that you mentioned, right, we at Corning have developed many different fiber types with different combinations of these properties. For instance, today we have fibers that are specifically designed to cross the 13,000 kilometers under the Pacific Ocean. And many other very different fibers that are optimized to either connect homes or 5G antennas or all the servers inside a cloud data center. And I think the beauty of all that is that the optical signal, right, that is carrying like this live chat today, for instance, is flowing seamless through all these different fiber types and reaching all the different viewers and listeners right now in different parts of the planet.
That's fascinating. So now that we've covered some of the fundamentals of the technology, I'd like to move the conversation to our current predicament. I realize we use fiber optics to move our telephone calls and internet connections around the world, but how is it specifically helping us during this COVID-19 pandemic? Marv, would you like to chime in on that?
Fiber optics makes it possible to access more and more services remotely. Before the pandemic, we might have been doing our banking or shopping online, but shopping for groceries remotely is probably a new thing. And so is telemedicine, at least for me. A week ago, I noticed that I had a tick bite. That can cause serious health problems here in upstate New York. At my telemedical appointment, my doctor could access my laptop camera to see the bite location, diagnose quickly, and even prescribe a course of action. The whole visit was incredibly convenient and smooth. It actually took far less time than a regular visit would. Without optical fiber and without fiber optics, telemedicine would not be possible. So the current situation is forcing us, and I think also helping us, to rethink some of the ways we live. I think that's especially true for all the people who are now working from home. We're finding new ways to work, to collaborate, and to congregate. For example, musicians, like my daughter, are creating exciting new forums for performing. Religious communities are exploring different ways to worship together. We're all searching for avenues that keep us walking together, to stay connected, to encourage, to support each other in these really difficult times.
I wonder if you might have some thoughts about this topic as it relates to content production and maybe entertainment.
Sure. So actually, there's a bunch of different things come to mind. So right now, Nova is in the process of making a film that'll be on next Wednesday. Okay, this is a plug. Next Wednesday, 9 p.m. Eastern Time on PBS, called Decoding COVID. And essentially, it's a film that we're trying to make really rapidly in an environment where we can't really safely send film crews out the way we would normally make a film. Most of our programs take 9 months or more to make from concept to when they actually broadcast. This is one that we're trying to make in a matter of weeks, which is already tricky, but it's made even more difficult by this difficulty in production. So from my point of view, I'm seeing the importance of this ability to communicate with a lot of bandwidth, meaning video, in a couple of different ways. So WGBH, where I work, where Nova is produced in Boston, we've all dispersed. 600 some odd employees have dispersed to their homes. So we're all depending on having good internet connection just to be able to communicate with each other over Zoom and over conferences like this. And, you know, nobody wants to see the spinning beach ball and the buffering and all that stuff. So clearly a lot of bandwidth on a personal level is important. And, you know, we've all gotten really spoiled because the idea that we wouldn't be able to get HD or 4K video anytime we wanted it, like at full resolution, is untenable these days for most people. So we're all dealing with that and how picky we are about the signal that we have in those interactions. But when we're making a TV show, regardless of whether it's being done in our normal frame of reference or not, we're sending large files of video content around between people in the field, between our editors, between filmmakers to PBS, et cetera, et cetera. And that's only been compounded in this case because we're doing we did a large part of the interviews with scientists and other characters in the film over Skype and Zoom and things like this, so that we had to get actually really good quality material coming in to make the film. And that requires a lot of bandwidth. But ultimately, the bandwidth that we really depend on is the bandwidth that takes the program from local PBS stations to millions and millions and millions of people who are watching the finished program. And you know, the cable providers and the other broadcasters are reporting massive increases in the amount of bandwidth that's being demanded from people who are stuck at home wanting to watch content. And all of that stuff is delivered, maybe not right up to your doorstep, but it's all being delivered in fiber optic cable. And the fact that you can use coherent light laser beams that can be modulated to carry many signals are traveling, you know, with very little loss of these very thin fibers is what makes it possible. And if you were to replace all of that fiber with copper to carry the same amount of information, the volume of that material would increase many millions fold. And so it just can't be overstated how important it is to just communication, but also the dissemination of information to a population in this country of 300 plus million, but the global population, in a way that now people are used to, which is on demand, what they want, when they want it. You know, in the days of turning on, you know, CBS at 7 o'clock on Sunday night to watch 60 Minutes, and if you didn't see it then, you wouldn't see it at all. Those days are gone, right? None of that would be possible without this great big fat, that's a metaphor because it's really thin, pipe that carries all this data.
Oh, that's fabulous. And Claudio, Chris sort of brought up an interesting point. We are using massive amounts of bandwidth, and particularly right now during our current situation, people are using the internet and communicating via fiber more than they ever have before. And I wonder how it is that fiber networks are able to scale up so quickly to meet this demand. Could you speak to that?
Sure. Well, those were great examples by Marvin and Chris, right? And I think the simplest way to look at it is that when you transition networks from copper, right, from copper cables to fiber, you're basically eliminating a bottleneck in the entire system, right? As Chris just talked, right, lasers today can be modulated at rates of many gigabits per second. It's a lot of information you can modulate in light there, in light pulses. The optical spectrum of the glass that's used in fibers, right? The amount of data that you can put there, the amount of lasers that you can put there, is such that you can have hundreds of lasers, each one of them transmitting at hundreds of gigabits per second at the same time. So what that means is that the bottleneck now is not in the medium that you're using to transmit the information anymore. It's going to be at the edges on the electronics probably. So that amazing capacity allow networks to respond to demand increase, like we are seeing right now in the COVID times, right? Without having to go and touch or change the millions of kilometers of optical fiber cables that are installed. There is enough bandwidth there to carry that traffic, right? The optics and the capacity of that glass is much more than we're using before. So there is a lot that you can still put into that without changing. And I want to emphasize one other very important detail that is directly connected to our current situation right now with COVID, right? Optical networks, different than some of the old networks based on copper, right? Because they are based on optical fibers, they are really ready for symmetric communication. What I mean by symmetric communication is there a more similar balance between upstream and downstream traffic, right? Traffic that's coming to you and traffic that's going out from you. Networks in the past, they were more designed for broadcasting and information download. So much more downstream traffic than upstream, right? But today, look at the content. Mainly now, during COVID times, right? The content is not centralized anymore, right? People are the content generators, right? You've got the YouTubes doing a lot of things. You've got teachers that are giving classes from home. So that's where the information is coming from. So you need to have that symmetric capability to send information both ways in the same rate. And that's what's allowing us to share our own content in a much more effective way.
It's really some amazing technology. It is incredible how it's supporting us right now. And I wonder, Marv, if you could maybe speak to how our world might be different if we didn't have this technology to support us through this right now.
You might remember years ago, Eric, when we used copper wire for our landlines, we sometimes paid up to $1 per minute for a long-distance phone call. Streaming videos uses far more data, so we'd be paying even more than that. At those rates, watching a movie might cost us $300 or $400 if we had only copper wire. Obviously, we wouldn't do that. So without optical fiber, we would not, and could not, use our computers or phones in the same way we do now. For example, there wouldn't be such a thing as binge-watching shows if we couldn't stream content so easily. Whether that's good or bad, I'll leave that up to someone else to decide.
You make some interesting points there. So our technology that we're counting on right now would be quite a bit more expensive if we didn't have fiber. Things like our binge watching could be costing us hundreds of dollars per hour. That certainly would prevent us probably from using that technology. So that makes a ton of sense. And Chris, I wonder if you might have some experience with how this is all benefiting us and what we might be losing at this moment as well.
Well, I mean, if you imagine if we lived in a world of copper, you know, which is the world we lived in when the internet first began, before it was the World Wide Web. You know, and those of us who are old enough to remember using dial-up modems and things like CompuServe and the Well and places that were kind of proto-internet sites, you know, it was sort of a laborious process to get access to a little bit of data, which was text data, typically. And you know, along comes somebody like Netflix that deals with this bandwidth problem by emailing you DVDs. And I remember when they first began to offer online be able to watch live streaming of their shows, it seemed mind-boggling to me that anybody could push that much data out to the number of subscribers that they wanted to have, you know, given the size of their catalog and the number of people who wanted to watch it. And it was only through this ability to have the massive amount of bandwidth, not just to your house, but to your neighborhood and to your community, where, you know, it would be the bandwidth would be subdivided into multiple households and multiple consumers, that you really understand where the importance of not only the digital revolution but optical fiber to carry all this stuff. You know, if you're watching the stock market right now, you've seen that the company Zoom, their stock price, I think, has basically doubled in the last couple of months. And today, Peloton, you know, which gives you live video while you're bicycling, their stock is up something like 30% in the last couple of days. And those companies would have no business model at all if they couldn't rely on this sort of massive bandwidth. So I can only assume that all you guys at Corning are all getting big fat royalty checks every single month from all these companies that are using optical fiber, because clearly their entire businesses would go under if you guys weren't able to supply that material. But all kidding aside, you know, the thing that's amazing to me is that we've all just come to take it totally for granted. And I can't imagine if the pandemic were underway right now and we didn't have this ability to communicate and to gain access to information, what would actually, well, there might be less 24-hour news, so that might be a good thing. But otherwise, like the loss of that technology would be really horrific. So there's just no question that it's completely changed the entire world, and also just the way that it opens up other countries into the World Wide Web is just phenomenal. And I think that's just a testimony to the low cost.
Great points. Now, we've touched on this a little bit, but Marv, I wonder if you could speak about, you know, we're seeing school and university campuses close down right now. Students are learning online instead of at their institutions. And how would this type of learning be impacted if we didn't have fiber optics to depend on right now?
We're seeing teachers, students, and in so many cases, students' parents, all trying to navigate this very different, new educational environment. Being in touch visually is a valuable part of any learning process. And I've got an example from the past few weeks. I've been collaborating with a graphics design professor at Binghamton University on his students' semester culminating projects. And not surprisingly, those projects are mostly visual. In our 5-minute online meetings, the student, who might be located at a home in a different state, can post a richly detailed graphic on a screen that's being viewed simultaneously by their professor at his home near campus and by me in my home 60 miles away from campus. So at the same time, we're having this great 3-person conversation while looking at visual designs and sometimes even sketching new ideas on the fly that we can share as we talk. It's amazing. Without fiber optics, we'd probably spend our entire 5 minutes just waiting for that first graphic to download.
We should all be thankful that our students are getting a much richer experience thanks to this technology. And Chris, I wonder if you could maybe talk about how this would affect streaming services that we're all counting on, like what we're video conferencing on, or all the content we like to stream online these days.
Well, again, it comes down to this the amount of content, not that's just coming into your home, but that's traveling down the fiber optic backbone, you know, throughout your city or your community. You know, the fact is that this is the data is a shared resource, and so just like water, if you had to share a single you know, central utility pipe full of water for your entire community, you'd want that pipe to be as wide as possible. You wouldn't want to go on any kind of a system where you're only allowed to take showers during a certain time of day, depending on what your neighbors are up to. It's the same thing with data. The more data that you're demanding through your pipe, the more data potentially your neighbors and other people might not be able to get. And I think from my point of view these days, you just don't feel, even now during the pandemic, you don't feel that slowdown. You're not seeing, at least I'm not seeing very often, watching a streaming, an HD piece of film streaming over Netflix or one of the other providers suddenly be knocked down in resolution because the pipe just can't keep up with the data flow. It's not just the fiber optic, obviously. It has a lot to do with packet switching and digital technology and the speed of computers and so on. And to my house, I don't have fiber up to my doorstep, but the fiber that's bringing that stuff in before splitting off into the copper cables that's going into each house is essential to kind of keeping all of that demand balanced with, it's kind of like the electrical grid, right? So an amazing thing I learned about the electrical grid was that a manager of a power station once said to me, electricity is the only thing that human beings manufacture that has to be used within a thousandth of a second of when it's manufactured. And it's really true. The electric energy that you want when you turn on a light switch has to be present at the moment that you demand it. And if it's not, your light won't go on. Or if there's not enough when someone else turns on their light, your light's going to dim. So that's this incredible balancing act between supply and demand that is completely invisible to us and we all totally take for granted. And now it's at the same point with data in a certain sense. Like you almost have the same experience with data as you do with a light, where you turn on the data flow and you get the data you want, whether it's TV, voice over IP, audio, music, whatever. And we're getting it from many channels, right? We get it through cables, fiber optic, copper, some combination thereof. We get it over the radio waves. 5G is coming. Everybody thinks, oh, 5G is going to be amazing. The amount of data and the bandwidth that 5G is going to provide over the air is amazing. But those broadcast points need to have the data fed to them, and that's going to come in through the largest capacity, lowest cost delivery system that there is, which is going to be fiber again.
That's great. So we've sort of looked at the fundamentals of fiber optics, how it's working for us today, what we might be lacking without it. But Claudio, I wonder if you could touch on what we can expect in the future with fiber optics. Where are we headed?
Sure, yeah, and actually I was just thinking about the example that Chris was talking about, and I think we all remember when we were younger, our patients, we are waiting for pictures to load in our computers, and that was okay. And now I guess the new generation will never survive waiting for a picture to load, right? Anyway, so future, look, it's interesting, right? You know that in your opening we are celebrating the 50th anniversary of this technology, right? And to be honest, after 50 years, I could not be more excited about our current moment with this specific tech, right? Excited about innovations in the optical fiber systems itself, but also on the applications and services that this technology is enabling. To mention two that we talked briefly about it, right, that are super hot right now is really 5G and hyperscale data centers, right? Those really large data centers where the cloud lives. For instance, 5G, right? We hear a lot about 5G networks these days, and we usually just think about a wireless, 5G is a wireless network. Actually, the foundation of the 5G network, right, it's totally based in a very dense fabric of optical fibers, right, that will have to connect a very large number of antennas. 5G can only enable all the new services that they are talking about, right? When you think about smart cities, connectivity, remote medicine, autonomous cars, lots of things that people talked about can only be possible if you reduce the distance where the signal is on the wireless domain, right? So you need to bring the antennas very close to the user. When you bring the antennas closer to the user, you need much more antennas. When you need more antennas, all those antennas for the 5G bandwidth, they are actually fed with an optical signal through optical fibers, right? And on the other end, the other hot space, right? As I said, the hyperscale data centers. That's where those fibers will be connected at the other end, right? They'll be linked to this another amazing dense fiber network connecting hundreds of thousands of computers inside large data centers. And what is happening there? There is where you got the AI, the artificial intelligence algorithms running. You got machine learning algorithms running. You got augmented reality. The background of augmented reality is enabled in those servers in data centers. So that's enabling a totally new range of new services that could not exist without all this glass. It's interesting, right? Fiber has transformed our lives already. When you think about phone conversations and then video and all that, and I think it's once again right now at the core of this transformation that we are living today with all those technologies. You pick the buzzword of the day: augmented reality, artificial intelligence, machine learning, 5G. All of them at the core, they are connected to this technology, which is enabling everybody to be connected to each other and machines to machines in a super efficient way. We just need to make sure that this tech reaches out to more and more communities, more and more people, so everybody can have a chance to enjoy that.
Excellent. Looks like we have a very bright future with fiber ahead of us. So that concludes our prepared portion, and now we're going to move into the question and answer. We've got several questions from the audience here, and I'll start with a question about security, and I think maybe Marv, you could handle this one. We use the internet to send a lot of sensitive information like banking details or to have a telemedicine appointment. How do fiber optics keep that information safe for us?
When electricity flows through copper wire, it radiates energy. That's a basic law of physics. That radiating energy can easily be tapped and the signal intercepted without even being noticed. Optical fiber doesn't radiate energy, so it can't be tapped that way or that easily. With optical fiber, any signal loss or any kind of interference with the signal can usually be detected and monitored. When you add data encryption on both ends of any communication, optical fiber is incredibly secure.
Fabulous. Chris, do you have anything you could chime in on that with?
Well, yeah, a couple things. So I think I was talking to you guys yesterday and mentioned that we made a film a few years ago called Cyber War Threat, which is really a fascinating film. It was about the potential for using for cyber attacks against physical infrastructure, kind of like the Stuxnet virus, for those of you who follow that stuff. And as part of that film, through a kind of complicated series of negotiations, I actually had access to the trove of stuff that is in the Edward Snowden library, so to speak, the materials that he removed from the NSA, which are all quite outdated now. But one of the things that struck me is that, number one, that not surprisingly, the NSA has a huge capacity to do incredibly clever things to intercept data and to eavesdrop. But one of the in many ways, some of the most clever and invasive methods that were in those documents that allow somebody to eavesdrop on communication between your computer and your computer monitor, even, let's say, those things all depend on copper. Like, for the reasons that Marv just outlined, that copper gives the signals in copper give themselves away, and to an outside observer, and fiber optic just doesn't do that. One of the and that reminds me of the fact that we're moving into away from the strictly 1 and 0 digital age into the age of quantum computing, and there's a phenomenon in quantum mechanics called quantum entanglement, where you literally have two photons or two particles that become entangled in a way that, even when separated at an arbitrary distance across the universe, if one of them, if the characteristics of one are resolved or revealed, the characteristics of the other one are instantaneously resolved or revealed. It doesn't seem to make any sense, but many experiments have shown that it's real. Well, that technology, quantum computing, can actually be built into a communication network in a way that makes an absolutely unbreakable encryption. It doesn't, in fact, it doesn't really make the encryption unbreakable, but when it's deployed properly, if there's an eavesdropper who picks up the signal in any possible way, the recipient will immediately know that the signal has been compromised. And it's, that's the kind of thing that you can only pull off through a fiber optic network or through any kind of light transmission. The Chinese are doing it with lasers and satellites right now, but it's going to happen, if it's not already happening, with fiber. So as we move forward in the future, fiber is going to be more and more important when it comes to this kind of encryption, privacy, quantum supremacy, as they call it in the military world, and it's. I think you're going to see less and less copper everywhere.
Excellent. So we've got a couple of questions here that are sort of similar, and I think, Claudio, you're probably the best person for this. What were some of the biggest obstacles for the scientists who developed the first functional optical fibers? What did they have to tackle to break through, and what allowed them to be a commercial success?
Sure. Well, at the very beginning, right, talking about the very beginning of optical fiber, we needed to make sure that the entire design of the fiber, the glass was pure enough to enable the light to go at a minimum distance that it became cost effective, right? So there was a target that people needed to make a optical waveguide, which is an optical fiber, that could enable the target was less than 20 dBs per kilometer. That's a measurement of attenuation, measurement of loss in the link. So there was a race about that, and that's what the Corning scientists were able to demonstrate first. They were the first to show that they could design an optical waveguide, an optical fiber that had that loss below that threshold. That threshold, again, was designed based on what's the minimum distance that I need to have between transmitter receiver or between amplifiers so that the system becomes cost effective, right? We always need to think that to make something commercially successful, cost is a super important point. So how pure the glass is, how the glass was designed to keep that light trapped in the core, to go a longer distance without losing many of those photons, was the critical barrier. Again, playing with different types of glass, and the process to make that glass was what enabled that. Now, when you think about the entire system, there are some things that were happening at the same time. For instance, semiconductor lasers that could operate at room temperature were also developed around 50 years ago. That combination was a critical element to make the entire optical communication system something that was a breakthrough for us, for the humanity. Now we got the lasers that can generate that light, and you can modulate all that information to that light also in a cost-effective way with semiconductor lasers running at room temperature. And you got the media, which is the fiber. Those two things happening around the early 70s was critical to make the entire system to work.
Excellent. So we don't have too much more time for questions here, so I think we're going to jump into one last question that really seems to hit home right now quite well from Troy. It's, I live in a part of New York that doesn't have access to high-speed internet, which I think is made possible by optical fiber. Do any of you think the pandemic will make fiber optic data transmission resources more widely available to rural areas? Marv, do you want to maybe give that a go?
Thanks for your question, Troy. I think we're seeing many systems that aren't working as well as people had hoped. The current situation is giving us an opportunity to rethink those systems and to reassess how essential different services really are, including and especially internet access. As I also live without high-speed internet access, I'm certainly hoping for improved data service.
And Claudio, would you maybe want to touch on that question of getting fiber out to rural areas a bit more?
Yeah, sure. I think it's going to happen. I think people are realizing the importance of, to keep the planet running. Everybody being able to connect is more than critical, right? When you think about the digital divide and how you can bring different communities to the same level, this is super important. I think governments around the world are starting to be a little bit more active on that and making sure that this is part of their plans, this is part of their strategic plans, bringing that connectivity to rural areas. We also need to remember that even if the fiber doesn't get to everybody's house in a rural community, just by getting closer, right? It goes into that point that Chris mentioned before. You get closer to, a group of houses, then you're sharing that signal, that optical signal, with less homes, with less people, so they can enjoy that capability more as well. I think it's going to happen. I think it was already starting to happen because everybody sees the need for that. And I think that the situation that we're going through, it just proved the point that connectivity is like the electrical grid that was mentioned before. It's a utility right now. It's not something that you can live without it.
Excellent. Well, that's a great way to wrap things up here. And we have reached the end of our time together. So I want to thank our speakers, Chris Schmidt, Claudio Mazzali, and Marv Bolt. And I hope you found this topic interesting, especially within the context of what we're all living through with COVID-19. If you enjoyed our first episode of Connected by Glass, please consider supporting the museum so we can continue to bring you compelling content. And we'll have another episode next Thursday. So please follow us on social media where we'll share details soon. Take care, everyone.